Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second day and the final session of 2 days of great programming. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you are able to join us. We have some great conversations coming up, so hang in there. You've joined the future of manufacturing technology. My name is Kan Vu. I am the CEO and Executive Director of the Society of Asian Scientists and Engineers. We're over 100 chapters across the United States. We have 3,000 folks at our conference. I love running it. I'm a former engineer, scientist myself, a chemical engineer by training, but run one of the largest nonprofits for Asian Americans in the science world. So thank you for joining us. We have great panelists today. I will introduce them and then we'll get into the topic here. So the first panelist we have with us is Jean Irisari, Vice President for Public Affairs, Head of Semiconductor Policy at Samsung. Jean, you want to do a quick introduction?
Sure. Thanks, Con. Oh. Can I speak? Okay. Thanks, Con. Appreciate you having me as part of the panel, and I appreciate APAICS for hosting this great event on technology and manufacturing. So I lead our semiconductor policy efforts for Samsung. Most people know Samsung for our two other businesses in Samsung Electronics, our mobile business, which includes smartphones and 5G networking equipment, but then also our consumer electronics business, which includes laptops and tablets and all the great appliances that you might find. The third big business is semiconductor. So we are the world's largest semiconductor manufacturer as it pertains to memory, so DRAM, NAND. We are also the world's second largest producer of foundry business. For instance, a lot of the world's semiconductor companies design their chips, but they contract it out to manufacturers like us to build the chips for them. And so we are the world's number 2 in that space. We provide most of the world's displays for consumer electronics. So for instance, we provide the display, which is the glass under the screen for most of or all of the Samsung Electronics products that we provide, but then also some of our competitors in that space like Apple and Google. And then lastly, we have our own set of processors that we are trying to take from just mobile processing for smartphones to other verticals like autonomous vehicles and other businesses like that. So very happy to be here, and thanks for having me on the panel.
Thank you, Jean. A lot of stuff that Samsung does. Truly, the word conglomerate comes to mind. Our next panelist, Erin Ennis, Senior Director of Global Public Policy at Dell. Erin, you want to talk a little bit about your background?
Sure. I'm glad to be here and talk about all the great things that are and interesting things that are going on in the semiconductor sector. I've been with Dell for about 2 years after spending 14 years at the U.S.-China Business Council and various jobs in the Washington, D.C. area dealing with international trade. In my role at Dell, I work very closely with our supply chain team. So both in terms of making sure not only that we have the supplies that we need, but that the parts get to our factories, that the packaging gets to our factories, and that things that are made in those factories get out the door and into the hands of customers. So looking forward to our discussion today.
Thank you, Erin. A lot of logistics issue right now. I'm pretty sure you have your hands full with all the news that going around with supply chain. Last but not least, we have Lihua Zhao from the Global Head of 3D Labs at HP Labs. You want to tell us a little bit about yourself, Lihua?
Absolutely. I'll start with me first. So I moved to US to pursue my PhD in chemistry and material science back to 20 years ago. So I'm still very young now. After that, I worked in a few technology areas. Now be at HP for about over 12 years. So now I'm a global head of a 3D lab at HP Labs and an HP Distinguished Technologist. As you all know, HP is the world's leading personal compute and print solutions company and providers. And then we are also growing in the areas of personalization and 3D printing, microfluidics, etc. My team's key responsibility is to push the boundaries on what 3D printing technology can provide to the world. With advanced capabilities, we can continue building in 3D. We hope to continue delivering our vision on building technologies to benefit everyone everywhere. So looking forward to the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, Liu. A lot of fun stuff I'm pretty sure you get to see built. So more exciting to delve into that a little bit later with you. So, you know, if you're watching the news recently, everybody's worried about supply chain. I'm pretty sure from our audience, if you're looking for a car, appliance, you're thinking about Christmas gifts, those things are, you know, being raised as an alarm. People are saying you need to buy now. You know, I was talking to Erin earlier, and she says you probably don't want to hoard, but yet you try to balance that. So we're going to try to tackle some of those issues about semiconductor supply chain and the impact of, you know, the fourth industrial revolution that's really upon us right now. So I want to go to Jean first to talk about, you know, some of the issues with supply chain and also the semiconductor area. And real quick background is the semiconductor, if you're not aware, is in everything nowadays, from our cars, our appliances, to toys. Of course, you know, game stations, you know, Nintendos, all that stuff has a lot of chip components involved in getting them to the product. So with that, Jean, you know, the current Executive Order 14017 that states the government will be the conveyor of industries, allies, and partnership. What else can government do to address this supply chain issue that we've heard on the news that's being raised, and there's concern about people not getting their Christmas gifts? What are your thoughts on that?
Con, that's a really great question. Let me start by saying that Samsung is proud to have recently announced our intention to invest another $17 billion to build a leading edge foundry in the United States that will help with the scarcity of semiconductors that have really kind of exacerbated the supply chain issues that you just mentioned. So very much so. And we find that the scarcity is not just in automotive, which is something that you hear a lot about because people go to their car dealer and notice that half the lot is empty and there's not enough product there. Or you hear about manufacturing lines, car manufacturers putting manufacturing lines on furlough because they don't have the $100 worth of semiconductor material to finish a $60,000 car. So again, it's something that, but it affects not just automotive, but basically all sectors. We're hearing it's affecting smartphones, it's affecting defense industries, it's affecting, you name it, as you mentioned. Semiconductors are in everything, and they're the building blocks of all electronics. So with regard to our $17 billion fab, we're hopeful that this will address supply chain capacity for critical sectors in the United States, including defense and tech, and aerospace, autos, and medical industries. Our new investment announcement is in response to the government's call to develop critical high-tech manufacturing capability within the United States. A lot of the manufacturing over the last 20 years in semiconductor has gone overseas. And you would think that that would be because of cheaper labor, but the semiconductor manufacturing process is highly automated. It really comes down to a number of these countries where these new facilities are being placed over the last few years. They have national and incentives that draw the semiconductor industry there, whether they be tax breaks or cheaper land, you name it, those investments are there. The U.S. government, the United States, they don't have that similar type of function. So when you look at investing abroad versus here, there's a study by the Semiconductor Industry Association which shows there's a 30 to 50% cost gap between building and operating a fab here in the United States versus overseas. And that's really because of these incentives. So what we have, and the rest of my colleagues in the semiconductor industry have urged the United States to do, is create a level playing field so that we can bring some of that manufacturing back to the United States. So one of the things that you may or not heard of, there's this piece of legislation that came up last year that was passed as part of the National Defense Authorization Act called the CHIPS Act. Part of that has a significant amount of money for a new Department of Commerce grant system that would go towards providing that kind of federal incentive for those that choose to build here in the United States. The other thing that's important that was part of the CHIPS Act but was not part of this NDAA passage is providing a federal investment tax credit for building or expanding semiconductor fabs. So we're actively looking to have that passed through Congress this year. I know the administration is very, very supportive. Secretary Raimondo has done a lot to urge key leaders in Congress like Senator Schumer, Majority Leader Schumer, Senator Cornyn, Speaker Pelosi to help pass this legislation, but we have to get it across the finish line. And that, I think, is the long-term solution of what the government can do, is level the playing field for everyone so that the United States is a great place to invest.
That's great insight, Gene. It sounds like the United States is not playing with a level playing field for us, especially in the manufacturing of semiconductor in the United States. So I think you've identified, making sure there's incentive, so there's a cost factor. What about the raw materials? Do we have in the United States the raw material and the skill sets, the workforce? Even though there's a lot, you said that there's automation in a lot of the building of these wafers. Do we have the other components to make the U.S. competitive in manufacturing from Samsung's point of view?
Sure, I think definitely we do. There are some rare earths that are important with regard to manufacturing that are key that we have to develop potentially abroad. But I think that whole idea of ally sourcing is very important. Multinationalism, multilateralism is important, not just unilateralism. So with regard to the semiconductor industry, I feel like there have been different companies headquartered within different countries that have taken specialty with regard to certain parts of the semiconductor system, say processors and Intel here in the United States, and memory, Samsung and SK Hynix in Korea. So it's very apparent that one country can't control the whole semiconductor supply chain. There has to be ally sourcing, and the United States should look towards allied countries in order to collect that material. But as far as workforce, the United States has very high skilled workforce, the best research universities, a lot of important IPs being done here. So in the semiconductor space. So I think the United States has all of the tools to become the world leader in semiconductor, but it has to be a team effort.
That's good to hear that the workforce is there. We just need to put the other components in to help the U.S. Grow our manufacturing base when it comes to semiconductors. I know recently, in Texas, we were hit with that freak snowstorm, and there was power outage. And I know that affected Samsung, some of the manufacturing there. You're talking about this, $17 billion investment. How has Samsung addressed the climate issue as they look at these investments?
So it's been very important for us to take a look at where you build locations and facilities, and the fact that climate is changing, so we're seeing that extreme weather is a very big part of what's going on right now. With this potential fab that we're building, we are looking at locations. And one of the things that we've required from each location is that not only will they provide us with an incentive package that they can put together, but also what are their plans for extreme weather? What are their plans for disaster mitigation? Because we want to make sure that they have the right infrastructure, whether it be water and electricity, which are two components that the semiconductor manufacturing process heavily relies on, and that semiconductor fabs are built to run 24/7, 365. So we have to have that, no matter what kind of weather we're looking at, no matter what kind of environment. So that's a very important issue for us. Plus, we also feel like, with regard to the chips that we make, they help create a more sustainable, more energy efficient world. And so that is one thing that we have been very much pushing for, is chips that are more efficient, that use lower power, that provide more sustainability, and then creating a more sustainable manufacturing process for ourselves.
Thanks for sharing that, Gene.
Sure.
Climate change impacts your bottom line, but you're also part of the solution from what you're saying too.
Yes, absolutely.
That's great. I want to bring Aaron into the conversation here. Michael Dell, famous Michael Dell of Dell Computers, recently said in an interview that the semiconductor supply chain will actually take years to solve. So the first question is, if it's going to take years to solve, how should consumers change habits? How should we change our habits to deal with this shortage?
Well, I think probably the obligation at this point is less on consumers and more on the companies that are using semiconductors. I think the thing to keep in perspective is something that Jean was just talking about. I mean, it takes a while to be able to build a fab, to be able to get it up and running, and then to meet all of the need. And much of the shortages that we are looking at right now are things that those of us who have been into the industry for a while can tell you we had anticipated. There's been a bandwidth capacity constraint on the production of semiconductors for many years. A factory can only make so many semiconductors in a 24-hour shift. And even if you have them running 24 hours a day, if your orders are well exceeding what your capacity is, then it's going to be difficult to meet all of that demand. That's among the reasons why it's going to take several years to get this worked through. We know that our colleagues at Samsung and TSMC and many of the other semiconductor manufacturers around the world are doing what they can to produce chips at the maximum rates possible. But demand is through the roof for these products. They go into just about everything. As you pointed out when we started, Con, it's not only in the things that you think of, like your computer games or your laptop that might be enabling you to work from home or your child to learn from home, but they're in medical devices. They're in fancy toasters these days. Anything that has a touch screen has got one in it. I mean, our world has changed to this being a fundamental part of how we do it. And that requires companies that are manufacturing with these to have sophisticated supply chains and to think 2 to 3 steps ahead to ensure that their own supply chains have the semiconductors at each of the points that they need to and lock in those contracts with their manufacturers. We will get out of this. I think that kind of solving the problem isn't necessarily something that any of us thought was going to be solved in the immediate term. It's really getting back to that point of where we know that everyone's got sufficient to make the minimum amount that they knew they wanted to make, and then looking at how we can continue to expand that capacity. Because if we had unlimited capacity for semiconductors, we could be creating all kinds of fancy products that would use these products and take us into the necessary technologies of the next generation, like 5G and many of the AI-enabled technologies.
So, Aaron, if I hear you correctly, you're saying that it was foreseen that there was a tight restriction in the supply chain in the semiconductor industry already prior to COVID. And what COVID did was really expose that and accelerated that. Is that a fair statement?
I think that's a fair statement. From our perspective, we knew that there have been constraints, and it's among the reasons why we engage in long-term contracts with our suppliers to make sure that we know how much capacity that we have. Some of the problems that we're dealing with right now are we had that perfect storm of issues of constraints on how many semiconductors were available, but then a dropping demand for goods. Some companies made choices to save some money because it was unclear where the economy would be going when we got out of the pandemic, and then found themselves needing to catch up because consumer demand came back a lot faster than anticipated. We've done I would say, a good to better job of managing our supply chain because both because we were able to build into our system some of the chips that became available when some industries backed off, but at the same time, we have been looking down the road to try to make sure that we don't ever find ourselves with a shortage to be able to meet the demand that we think that consumers have.
So what I'm hearing you say is, if you wanted to buy a Dell computer now, it should be available, right?
That is what I'm telling you, yes. We'd be happy for everyone to fill their Christmas stockings with Dell computers.
Okay. Thank you, Aaron. Before we get to our last speaker, I just want to remind those who are joining us live that feel free to put in the comments on the YouTube stream here with your questions, and the APAICS staff will look at them and send them our way. So please feel free to ask any questions you have, and we'll try to address those. And our last panelist is Li Hua. As Aaron and Jean mentioned in their sections, there is a supply issue and a shortage quite critically. HP's website stated that there's an implementation product process that will allow you to rapidly develop unique solutions, especially through 3D printing. Do you think 3D printing will help solve some of the supply chain issues?
Sure, that's a really great question. I don't think I can actually solidly say we're going to solve the supply chain issues just yet, but I definitely think 3D printing has been augmenting the supply chain resilience, especially through this COVID or pandemic period. Two big advantages of a 3D printing has always been speed and localized production, which really enables companies to localize and simplify their supply chains. We just heard Jean and Ari talking about the producing things or manufacturing things, not only the final product as the chip, but through the process, all those tools that actually required to make this final product also need the supply chain that actually have a significant resilience to help them to go through and get through this. So for 3D printing, making tools for the manufacturing, traditional ones or advanced ones, and also more and more today towards building the final parts, objects, and products for many different needs. One of the unique characteristics of a 3D printing technology is they are flexible manufacturing infrastructure. Let me give you a quick example, right? So pandemic showed the power of a 3D printing. In the past year, we produced over 3 million parts for hospitals and frontline workers. Okay, most of those printers used to build those PPEs, personal protection equipment, to support our frontline workers, were manufacturing something else before pandemic. Okay, so you may know Smile Direct, who is one of the companies, are delivering affordable dental treatments for many of customers using HP's multi-jet fusion technology. But during this time, they quickly moved all the printers to start producing those PPEs. So that is one of the examples telling you the 3D printing technology and augment the supply chain resilience. And the supply chain resilience now is definitely a top priority, not just the United States, but across the world, right? So 3D can certainly play a big role in supply chain transformation and provide more robust resilience throughout the period.
Yeah, thanks for that insight about 3D printing and what it brings in capability. There's a quote from Walt Disney that I'm going to put a little spin on it. It says, "If you can dream it, you can print it," right? As one of the key pillars of Industrial Revolution 4.0, what are the potential of 3D printing that you're really excited about? I know that you've seen, at home you can print out, Einstein's head and all these other cool things that you can't actually make because it's almost impossible to make. What excites you about 3D printing?
Yeah, this is a really great question, and I like the quote. And I would say that it is the North Star, or going to be the North Star, continuously when we're developing the 3D technology or digital manufacturing. That fits really perfectly into the Industry 4.0 revolution. So what really exciting here is one of the things we all know, many things we build is one size fits all, right? So, and we all have shoes. How many of us have a foot pain because of not quite right shoes? And then there is also the prosthetics and such, and then needed to be really tailored for the patient themselves. So many of these examples, right? So manufacturing for a market of one with the sustainability built in is definitely a very exciting area and excites me day in and day out, right? So 3D printing is the ability to create personalized items and solutions for unique needs, for the just right for us, right? So eliminating the cost of extra tools for shaping and each of the product. The other part is 3D printing also produce the environmental footprint of the manufacturing. and which is really what we're talking about is manufacturing. You make it in one place and ship to the multiple places and such and such. If we can and able to produce locally and shipping those zeros and ones, right, which really means the digital files at the tip of your finger for the production locally rather than shipping the physical goods, then 3D printing can really lower the emission related to the distribution and warehousing. In addition, I think the 3D printing that actually really makes the breakthrough designs a reality. Why we need the breakthrough designs, where the unique structure can add new performance properties with less weight, which cannot be produced with any other manufacturing technology today. Okay, so the result is reduced time to parts and cost per parts, decrease energy and resources consumption, and lower greenhouse emission, all critical variables and priorities in promoting a circular economy, and particularly for really us all thrive in this industry 4.0.
Yeah, that's some great information. I think that, having personalized solutions at our fingertips, and also knowing that if I print something, I'm kind of saving the planet in the sense of, getting rid of waste, right? I think that's very attractive, and to me, that's probably the new sexy, right, of 3D printing. That we can get something personalized and then save all the waste. The transportation costs that you talked about, and also the one size fits all mentality. So that's great. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. And again, reminding our audience that please go ahead and put your comments and questions in the sections in YouTube, and then we'll try to get to them. Kind of an open up right now questions for our panelists. Talking about all this technology and how great it is, and there is some reality about competition. And I'll address this first one to Gene. I think, Aaron, you have some thoughts on this after Gene talks. But China has their Made in China 2025 as a policy. Germany has Industry 4.0 as their industrial strategy. And it covers manufacturing, a lot of high-tech stuff. First question is, should the United States government have a more intentional strategy, like a national industrial policies, which would include advanced manufacturing? Gene, I think you touched on it, but I just want to get clarity. Is that something you're advocating for, and what would that look like possibly?
So very, very good question, Khan. So Samsung, we're a proud South Korean headquartered global company, and we look forward to a close dialogue with a range of U.S. stakeholders in Washington to ensure we're advancing our shared interests. We encourage consultation with various industry voices, including semiconductor trade associations. And we believe a comprehensive approach that involves public and private sector investments, protection and security of critical IP, and a secure and resilient global supply chain will definitely help ensure that we have a vibrant and resilient advanced manufacturing system. As I mentioned in my previous comment, the semiconductor industry is a global industry. The U.S. will always need the partnership of allied countries to meet the needs of the industry. So the resiliency and redundancy of production at companies like ours with a global footprint helps to mitigate against disruptions in the United States. Without the support of fabs around the world, the disruptions experienced in Texas would have had a more dramatic industry, or a more dramatic impact on the industry. So it almost makes sense that the manufacturing be spread out and have redundancy in the supply chain in order to not be as at risk as it currently is. But this is a critical moment. The U.S. either needs to invest in semiconductors now or be prepared for reduced economic growth. And there are threats to national security, and we already know that there's a weakened supply chain. So this is precisely why the U.S. needs to fund the CHIPS Act, as I mentioned, and the other incentives that we all are advocating for. And I know that there are particular groups that are trying to put together potentially a semiconductor roadmap in consultation with the U.S. government and industry, kind of like the public-private partnerships that I've been mentioning. And that's something that we would be fully supportive of.
Thanks, Gene. Yeah, I think that having a coordinated effort definitely helps the United States become competitive, as you mentioned earlier. Aaron, do you want to tackle that question? I have another question that Jean touched on.
I'm happy to take that one and any other question. I think there's a couple of things to keep in mind. It is, I think, very appealing for us to look at other governments and how they plan things and think maybe the United States should be doing the same. The reality is that China, Germany, many other countries, they are strategic planners. They set 5-year goals, they benchmark themselves, they check in regularly on it. We can do some of that in the United States, and certainly we have some industries where we've developed it, but that's not really where our strong suit is. We are the innovators. We are the ones that we allow industry to be able to put money into where the innovation is coming. Government, in my experience, has been not that great of a bet layer on where the next big thing is going to come from. So while I do think we need to be intentional, industries, not just semiconductor manufacturing, but the inputs that need to come into the semiconductor industry to enable it to make its products, and then frankly the other end of it, how we get those into those innovative products and ensuring that we're building on the R&D that is our strength in the economy. Somewhere in between that is where the U.S. model should be. And while we need to be competitive, I think that Jean's point is exactly right. Our competitiveness comes not from the idea of making everything here within the geographic boundaries of the United States. It's recognizing that the strength that we have from our companies is being able to tap into the resources wherever they are, and giving us the ability to be nimble, to both to meet demand when it comes up, but also to deal with shortages as they come up.
So what you're saying is the United States should be really a convener of all the stakeholders, and maybe address the issue of innovation, some basic research, and also maybe some convener of supply chain.
I think that all has strength. I think that investing in things like the semiconductor industry, the CHIPS Act, is very important because it's an area that we know that the demand is not going to go down. And we also know that in order to meet the demand that we even have right now, we need a lot more semiconductor fabs around the world. The United States should be part of it. Those are good, high quality jobs. We are on the cutting edge of those areas. What I'm saying is that we shouldn't rely just, however, on the government deciding where we should be going. We need to make sure that there's a strong component of allowing private sector to determine where we're going so that it can be responsive to where the demand is coming from.
Private, definitely, the United States is definitely private industry driven. And so I think that component, to your point, we're not a communist state, and we're not as organized in the sense of the industry like worker unions across like Germany is. So yeah, I think some of their solutions, to your point, it might seem on the outset kind of idealistic and looking, but you're right, the United States is very innovative. One of the things that Jean touched on was the relationship between China and the United States, and the tension a little bit about that. And one of your previous positions was a senior position at the China-US Business Council. Do you have any insights on that, since China is a huge manufacturer in the semiconductor and the US is a consumer? What's the ideal, forward-looking relationship that we should see China as from the United States point of view with respect to the semiconductor policy?
Yeah, I think this is an area where we're going to be constantly looking for where the right balance is. China is an integral part of many companies' supply chains, and that doesn't mean that it has to stay that way, both because of some national security concerns the United States and other governments have raised over the years, but also an over-reliance on any one market creates the kinds of risks to supply chains that those of us who deal with it on a day-to-day basis want to mitigate as much as we possibly can. So diversification, I think, is important. But I do think that it's important for us to get back to a place, and I think we're headed there currently, it appears, where we are in active discussion with China. It is not a threat on everything. It's an opportunity in many areas. There will be areas that the United States and China will simply never agree on. But there are also areas where we can work together, where we can cooperate on these areas, and we can have respectful disagreement that doesn't lead to trade wars or tariff wars. balance is important in all aspects of life. It's also important in U.S. economic relations, and specifically U.S. economic relations with China.
Yeah, it's a very delicate balance, as you said, depending on what issue and where we can find, something that we can go forward together. It's definitely a more complex relationship that I think it's just, most people might see it's just black and white, or us versus them. Lihua, you might have some personal thoughts on that, but I don't know if you want to address any of the comments made before on those questions, or did you want to talk about, U.S. manufacturing? What are your thoughts?
Well, both Aaron and Jean touched on those topics, and I agree with all the points they just made. And in terms of U.S. manufacturing, it's definitely a hard topic, and it's from a very advanced once become to now we're not really manufacturing much, we're consuming all the manufactured goods. So these are a different shift. And then coming back is definitely US realizes some of these, especially given when the supply chain shortage happens and we just can't get what we need and such. Its awareness is strong, and there are different type of consortium already start forming, and American Makes is one of them, right? So it's really, and that is just as both Aaron and Jean said, it's not like one or two segment, is how all the sectors actually working together, right? Within the ecosystem and across the ecosystem to actually build the infrastructures and build the capabilities, what we could do. Coming back from the 3D and then how that actually help is, what is a competency here we actually have. I located in the Bay Area, right? So the San Francisco and Silicon Valley areas. What is a competence here? How much a digital portion of this and the cutting edge technology we can utilize to reinvent our manufacturing. So these are the both like advancement for the software and hardware to improve the manufacturing efficiency, improve manufacturing ability, create the things that is more efficient and more cost effective. All of these are great and challenging topics. So that does require multiple sectors coming together and work to tackle these problems, right? So we talk about environment, we talk about sustainability, and what needs to be done. It's definitely wonderful to have many sectors coming on the same page, talk about, debate it, discuss it, and find the pathway to move forward.
Yeah, it sounds like we're at the beginning of 3D printing, that we have to convene all these folks to sit down and have these discussions, as you were saying. So the promise of 3D printing is not even here yet, according to what you're saying. Is, what industry do you think will be highly impacted if you had to predict and, take out your crystal ball and really look into the future? What industry do you think will be really impacted by 3D printing? Can you give us examples?
Certainly, it's all of these are evolving and continue. 3D printing not invented like 3 years ago, but it does actually really become an emerging technology for a production or for manufacturing. So it is at the early stage. There are limitations. So it's not just the 3D printing we're going to be solve all the problem we're having, right? But how do we actually integrate it, augment it with the traditional manufacturing, with the new advanced manufacturing all together? Areas for me to really feel excited and think and make a huge difference and impact is health and wellness, medical and dental, all these areas, which is super big for U.S. economy itself, right? So we know the cost and we know what's needed for many people, not just the United States and around the world. And the industries who are looking for making the parts and devices that are more sustainable, more efficient based on the new to world breakthrough designs, and then the bigger collaborations within ecosystem, across the ecosystem, are all needed to come together and work together on that. One of the example we actually already have today is really interesting to see is how this, the dental aligner treatment provider, Smile Direct, partner with HP and partner with Ford. It's interesting combination we see is all right, so we all actually utilize the 3D to produce something, but doesn't mean 3D does not generate anything that's no waste. How do we actually utilize the recycled material, make even a better one, right? So this is 3 combination, sounds like Smart Direct, HP, Ford, but it actually come together. So HP and Ford have joined forces to create an industry first pilot program that reuse span in the 3D printed powders and parts and turn them into the injection molded vehicle parts for Ford F-250, right? And during this process in Smile Direct, the mold they created from a 3D printing also come collected together and put in a one space. And so we can all recycle this and use it for a different manufacturing process, which is injection molding, one of them traditional ones, to build the parts that's actually needed. So it sounds a little crazy, but that's what I'm talking about, within the ecosystem and across the ecosystems. So these are the areas, it's just a lot of challenges and a lot of opportunities to come to really be a disruptor.
Yeah, it sounds like, to the quote, if you can dream it, right, you can try to build it and print it. I'm looking forward to the lower cost of orthodontics. I know I pay a lot of money for my 14-year-old to get his teeth corrected, quote unquote. So I'm looking for that waste and reduction of cost and the personalization. With that, we're almost at time, and I want to give each of our panelists some time for last thoughts about this, really important topic about supply chain, future technology. What do you have as far as a final nugget for our audience? And we'll start with you, Li Hua. What do you think that they should take out as they think about, this 4th industrial revolution and how it impacts them and what the United States can do?
I think all of us actually have ability and to now can have opportunity to really play our potential, right? And so potential is limitless. 3D printing or digital manufacturing or these advanced tools actually started helping every of us to create, to build, to free your mind, having the right objectives in your mind, what you wanted to do and help the world and help the society. So it's, again, to me, is potential is limitless right now. It's a lot of challenges, but definitely lots of opportunities.
Yeah, that's a great message. The future is ours to mold, literally. So thank you, Li Hua. Erin, your final thoughts?
Yeah, I think this has been a fascinating discussion, so thank you for including me. I think the thought that I would like for us to conclude on is just to remember that we have incredible strengths in the U.S. economy, and part of that strength is here at home. There's a lot that we can be doing to make sure that we've got advanced manufacturing, that the semiconductors that we need are being produced here at home. But part of our strength also comes from our engagement with the rest of the world and that integration of supply chains, which has enabled us to be able to get products at a reasonable price into the hands of American consumers almost whenever they want it. Granted that we've had some challenges over the last year on that front. But I would say kind of the main takeaway that I hope that that folks who have listened to this panel will have is just understanding the complexity of what it takes for these supply chains to run, the importance of it, but also an understanding that it's that integration that we have with the global economy that's enabling us to come through these issues. And that's going to be part of our strength coming out of it as well.
That's a good point, Erin, that, the integration with the global economy helps us, and it will be part of the solution moving forward. 100% agreed on that. Gene, last thoughts.
Thanks, Con, and thanks to Erin and Li Hua for being such great panelists with me on this really interesting discussion. So 3 years ago, I would have never imagined that the general public would have had such an understanding of semiconductor and how it affects supply chain. I was actually traveling for work a few months ago, and there was a real lack of rental cars available, and I had to take one that they only had 1 or 2. And I asked the guy, I was like at the counter, why don't you have more cars? And he said, well, there's this semiconductor shortage going on. And I was shocked because this is the rental car guy at an airport that was telling me about the semiconductor shortage. So I think it has really been, as Aaron had said, we were aware that there were supply chain shortages before, but COVID has really exacerbated the weaknesses and then basically supercharged the demand for semiconductor. And as we all had mentioned earlier, we're at very much at a crossroads where the U.S. can choose to compete internationally and work as a team to build capacity so that we can accomplish amazing things. But they have to choose to do that. And, I think there's definitely a need to pass legislation to help with that onshoring of manufacturing here in the United States. So with that, I thank everybody for being on this great panel and this great discussion.
Thanks, Gene, for that insight that the United States government does have a role to play in all of this, and that, we need to work together, the whole integration. And it's really great to know that people are aware that there is a shortage of semiconductor. Hopefully, again, we don't all rush and buy toilet papers and semiconductors that we'll be having to limit it at Costco or someplace like that.
Right.
Again, echoing Gene, I want to thank our three panelists, Gene, Aaron, and Li Hua, for joining us today and sharing their knowledge about the semiconductor industry, the shortages, 3D printing. And it's a very hopeful future. I know the last 18, 20 months has been really hard on a lot of people. And just to acknowledge that, it's a tough time for some, but to Aaron's point that the future is bright. We have what it takes to make a bright future. And so with that, I'm going to hand my last duty over to Madeline, our leader, fearless leader, to take us out of here. So Madeline, thank you for the opportunity, and thank you to our panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Con, for serving as our moderator for this discussion. We really appreciate it. And of course, to our panelists for joining us today. I know the audience learned a great deal about supply chain issues, and we're hearing it more in the news in regards to the pandemic related shortages of goods. So I hope the audience was able to appreciate the whole line of questions and discussion of this, and hopefully the solutions. I also just want to thank the APAICS team for putting together this tech summit, the 3C strategies team for also organizing all of our panelists and our event partners for this. We really appreciate having such a great staff. And I want to take a moment to thank all of you for participating today as audience members in this inaugural tech summit. So thank you to all of our participants who came to join us virtually. And if you, for whatever reason, know of friends and networks of your own that might have missed some of these discussions, please encourage them to take a look at the APAICS Facebook and YouTube channels to be able to catch up on the recording. So I think all of these discussions were informative and learned a great deal about so many things regarding tech these past 2 days. We wouldn't have been able to do this if we didn't have event partners for this. So I really would like to take a moment to thank Accenture, Airbnb, Amazon, AT&T, DoorDash, Facebook, Hewlett-Packard, Microsoft, AARP, Charter, CTIA, Dell, Salesforce, Samsung, Toyota, and Verizon for being phenomenal supporters and really sharing their knowledge on tech. Thank you so much for all of the time that you've taken to teach us more about the issues that you're working on and really showing the impact with the AAPI community. So thanks so much for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you the next time.